Every single day, thousands of people legally drive faster than 250 kilometers per hour, and they're not breaking the law. No, they're not professional race car drivers. They're simply driving to work, going on vacation, or heading home after a long day. Which raises an obvious question. Why would any government allow this? We've been told our entire lives that speed limits save lives. They're one of the very first traffic rules we learn as drivers. So, if removing speed limits is so dangerous, why do some countries refuse to put them everywhere in the first place? And perhaps an even stranger question, are speed limits themselves what make roads safe? Or is something else doing most of the work? The answer might completely change the way you think about road safety. Let's start with the world's most famous example, Germany's Autobahn. The internet has turned the Autobahn into something of a legend. People picture it as one giant racetrack where everyone is driving at absurd speeds while somehow avoiding complete chaos. But that's not reality. In fact, one of the biggest misconceptions about Germany is that it has no speed limits. It doesn't. Large sections of the Autobahn have mandatory speed restrictions because of traffic, weather conditions, construction zones, and safety concerns. Only certain stretches have no mandatory speed limit, where drivers are given what's known as an advisory speed of 130 kilometers per hour. Notice the wording there, advisory. You're trusted to make responsible decisions based on the road conditions around you. And that's where this story becomes much more interesting than simply fast cars go vroom. Countries that allow unrestricted speeds aren't necessarily less concerned about safety. In many ways, they're asking even more from their drivers. Take Germany's driving test, for example. Getting a driver's license isn't quick, easy, or cheap. Drivers undergo extensive training and are expected to understand strict road etiquette. The left lane isn't for sightseeing. If a faster vehicle approaches from behind, you're expected to move over immediately. Lane discipline isn't considered a suggestion, it's part of the driving culture. In other words, Germany isn't simply trusting drivers to drive fast, it's trusting them to drive responsibly. And Germany isn't the only example. The Isle of Man, a self-governing British Crown dependency, is famous for having many rural roads without a national speed limit outside urban areas. It's also home to one of the most dangerous and prestigious motorcycle races in the world, the Isle of Man, TT. Again, however, no speed limit doesn't mean no rules. This is where many people get confused. Having no posted speed limit doesn't mean you're allowed to drive at whatever speed you want under any circumstances. If you're driving recklessly during heavy rain, poor visibility, or dangerous traffic conditions, you can still face serious legal consequences. Freedom doesn't replace responsibility, it increases it. So why don't more countries follow this approach? The answer is surprisingly simple: predictability. Speed limits aren't just about controlling the fastest driver on the road. They're about creating behavior that millions of completely different people can understand instantly. Think about who uses our roads every day. There's the experienced driver who's been behind the wheel for 30 years. There's the nervous teenager driving alone for the very first time. There's the tourist who's never driven in your country before. And there's the exhausted parent coming home from a 12-hour shift at work. Roads aren't designed for perfect drivers driving in perfect conditions. They're designed for everyone. A simple sign that says 100 kilometers per hour removes uncertainty. Everyone knows the expectation. And that's incredibly valuable when millions of people are sharing the same roads every single day. Which brings us to perhaps the biggest misconception of all. Countries with roads that have no mandatory speed limits aren't proving that speed limits don't work. They're demonstrating that road safety is much bigger than a number printed on a sign. Driver education matters. Road design matters. Vehicle safety matters. Traffic enforcement matters. And perhaps most importantly, driving culture matters. Two countries could have identical speed limits and completely different accident rates simply because one country produces more disciplined drivers than the other. So, are speed limits important? Absolutely. But they're only one piece of a much larger puzzle. The real question isn't whether drivers should be allowed to go faster. It's whether they've been given the education, the infrastructure, and the responsibility required to do so safely. And that's why some countries can trust their drivers a little more than others. The next time someone tells you Germany has no speed limits, you'll know that's only half the story. The real story isn't about speed at all. It's about trust, responsibility, and the countless things that make our roads safer long before we ever look at a speed limit sign. Now, I want to hear from you. Should more countries remove speed limits on certain highways, or are they absolutely necessary? Let me know down in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing and helping us grow this channel from the very beginning. We're just getting started, and there are thousands of fascinating stories hiding behind the everyday things we rarely stop to question. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.